Hi, welcome to Contingency Planning with Iron Edge Group. We're talking about a great subject today, contingency planning in your environment and your business. This should be valuable to understand what contingency planning is about, all the plans that are out there and how we define them, but most importantly, how you can adopt some of these plans into your organization to use them in the event that you actually have a disruption to your business processes. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And with us, I have Mr. Dan Mallard.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all again.
Yeah, you want to give us a quick intro on who you are, sir?
Yeah, I'm Patrick's. We share shirts, apparently, according to the slide. Now, Patrick and I are both vice presidents of Iron Edge. We've both been with the company. I've been with the company 8 years. Patrick's been here for
like 12,
13, 12,
yeah,
13?
12, 13 years.
So we've been around a good long time at Iron Edge. We've both been in the industry 20 years. And our primary job at Iron Edge is to ensure that our key clients are happy and they're getting a great experience, and all the systems that we provide for them are working correctly to support them and enable them to do business. And then the client on top of all that is enjoying, what we do. So that's what I do. That's, pretty much what Pat does too. So.
Yeah, and so our real goal with working with our clients and the industry at large is to help them. Obviously, a lot of the times, most organizations, this isn't their primary focus and their primary subject, right? So they may not know really what contingency planning is about. Oftentimes, a lot of terminology is kind of thrown around, like disaster recovery plan, business continuity plans, and oftentimes interchangeably, when in fact there is, and we'll get into it here in a second, but in fact, there's a lot of specific terminology, the types of plans that you can incorporate into your organization. And so we want to talk about those at a high level, and really where we focus on, obviously, as an IT group, is information systems and the technology that surrounds them. Those are the ones that we find most critical and the ones that we're most familiar with when we're working with. But we'll talk about contingency planning in general, what that's about, right? And so one of the ways that we've found, or actually not we, but the industry at large, because I mentioned there's a lot of terminology that's tossed around interchangeably. Well, the federal systems had put together some defined terminology for contingency planning, and what we talk about today is based on NIST's special publication 800-34. NIST is a federal, it's National Institute of Security Technology. It's a federal branch that was established basically in the early 2000s to kind of define a lot of the different programs and security initiatives. One of the, and we won't get too much into this, but one of the security program frameworks that we really like to use is the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's a great framework to build upon your organization to kind of create a security program. But part of NIST's initiative is a lot of this defining and creating a lot of this information that organizations and businesses can use to build things like contingency plans. And so we really like NIST's, and all this stuff is, again, freely available to both federal environments, but more importantly, private and commercial organizations that can use this to adopt this into their organization.
Yeah, and I'll say that it's not industry specific. Like, you'll get into, we talk with our clients about PCI regs and FINRA regulations and all these different things that are fairly industry specific. What's really good about the NIST framework is any company anywhere can refer to it and get a standard set of language, a set of protocols, a set of procedures, and it applies to everything. So we can then apply that to all of our clients, and even ones that are PCI, that need to be PCI compliant and everything else. We still use the NIST framework to develop the systems that they use and to help guide our account management for them, through their life with us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's great because they have crosswalks, which are basically like, if you have a HIPAA requirement or a PCI requirement. They have what are called crosswalks that you can map, a certain control in the framework over to your governed industry, like the retail industry or medical industry. It's great. And part of the, like I mentioned, the NIST definitions are these contingency plans. And so I want to just kind of quickly review the types of contingency plans that exist out there and really what they mean. And so that we're talking about the right terminology with regards to the types of plans that exist out there. So here's a few. There's not all of them. I think I left out probably two that are more tailored to the federal environment, but these are ones that are valuable to develop within an organization in general, right? So you have a business continuity plan, which is often what people tend to think of when they're talking about contingency planning. With regards to definition, this is specifically about a process disruption. And when I say process disruption, you can think of maybe your payroll process or maybe your customer service process. So a policy that's generated or a plan that's generated from a continuity standpoint is how would you go about intervening if there is a breakdown in that process? Say, for example, your payroll department is, I'm trying to think of an example. Your payroll department is interrupted in some way. Do you have a method to maybe outsource that service so that it's not disrupted if there's an issue with that process, right?
That's a really good example. I think, imagine you're the payroll department and the software platform you use to pay people doesn't work, right? So your process is disruptive. So the plan would be how to evaluate that, how to respond to it, how to communicate with stakeholders on that, and then how to restore operations, whether that's using a third-party system or cutting paper checks or whatever it is. Exactly. And that's what that is. And Patrick's definition of the process disruption there in the slide is very, very important. I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, and so the next one would be a continuity of operations plan. This one's going to be very similar to a disaster recovery plan, but a continuity of operations plan is really a temporary disruption to probably your main office. If you're thinking about your corporate office, say, for example, there's an ice storm, which is pretty common in the Texas area, where you can't get to the office, but you have a continuity of operations plan where you're able to continue your normal operations, but potentially in an alternate fashion, whether it's like working from home or working from another office, but continuing your operations just in a temporary manner. And this really is the 30-day timeline, which is within 30 days. That's when this type of plan would be enacted.
Yeah, and for anybody from out of Texas that is listening to this and heard that something common in Texas is ice storms and it's problematic. It's problematic for us in Texas because we don't have the infrastructure to support getting around the city and a power grid that supports ice storms. So that just to explain that to anybody in the north part of the United States or anywhere else,
it always laughs at us.
Why would that be a disruption for you? Well, we are once our roads are iced over, we're in trouble around here.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, or flooding for that matter.
Yes.
Crisis communication plans. This is really more to do with who's in charge of communicating stuff, either internally or externally. Oftentimes, this is kind of a PR plan. So if you have some sort of disruption or some sort of problem with your organization, how that's communicated out to the public, potentially, who's in charge of answering those questions, those sort of things, right? So that's typically important when something goes down, maybe like you guys get hacked or systems down for an extended period of time. Who internally is providing updates and who is then maybe communicating that stuff out to your clients.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. That one's super important because sometimes it's required that your attorneys be involved, or it's required that you pull in a PR firm or whatever to deliver the message, especially external to your organization. So once that plan's in place, you refer to the plan. Once you have an incident, you go, okay, this is the group or this is the person that's going to communicate externally. That can be a very big deal if the wrong people get out sharing information that you don't intend to get out. So super important stuff.
And then we're moving on to the disaster recovery plan. Again, this one's a common plan that people tend to think of. Now, when we define what a disaster recovery plan is, this is actually a physical disruption to your office space or headquarters. Typically, this means it's like a major physical disruption. This would be like your building burned down, or like there's nothing left, and you need to be able to bring up all of your systems in an alternate fashion, another location. So this is really more than 30 days. If you find that your office space or your building isn't habitable within 30 days, would be the continuity of operations plan. The disaster recovery plan would be really what you guys do in a major scenario where you have to rebuild everything, and it's going to take you maybe a couple of months to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And how that's related is the information security contingency plan, which is where we typically play in, because this is where we're most familiar with, and I'll skip over to the next slide here. But they're all sort of there's a relationship with all these plans, right? So you look at this peach colored plan, those are process related. You have the green plans, which are going to be assets or personnel. Like I didn't talk about the OEP, which is the occupant emergency plan, which is like, what happens if there's like a bomb threat? What do your employees or personnel do in that situation? But the crisis communication plan and the occupant emergency plan are personnel related. And then all these gray ones down here are going to be information systems. Those are your technology, right? And so you have the ISCP, which is your information system contingency plan. You have your CIRP, which is your cyber incident response plan. I think I skipped over that one previously. That's going to be an incident response. A cyber incident response is, say you get a virus in your environment. What do you do from a security perspective to tamp down that? What's your response with a cyber incident type situation, right? I have CIP. That's the one I didn't include on there. That's more to do with the federal systems. That's infrastructure. Maybe people in the energy might have pipelines that they have responsibility for. It's those sort of things. It's going to be like water and oil pipelines and maybe energy. That's typically not too common in the private industry. But really what we want to kind of focus on is what your information system contingency planning is. And what that is, an information system is really anything that is, it could be anything from your email system. That's an information system. It could be your phone system. That's an information system. It could be your accounting application or your accounting servers. Those are information systems. Each one is an individual information system. And it's important to keep those separate because if in the event you have an incident, say like, a system goes down that's specific to your accounting application, you don't necessarily want to open up a plan that has all these instructions on what to do in this sort of scenario, and it's littered and cluttered with stuff that's not relevant to your accounting. Like if you put all your emails, your email system setups in this same plan, it significantly reduces the efficiency in that sort of situation, because you want to have clear and direct instructions and directions on how to recover these systems. And it really needs to be focused on each individual system. So what you would ideally have is a plan for every one of your different information systems. So you would have a plan for your email system. You have a plan for your phone system. You have a plan for your accounting system or your ERP. And you have a bunch of these plans, and they all sort of roll up into, if I go back to the previous slide here, they all roll up into your disaster recovery plan. So for example, your office has a couple of servers that you host there in your closet, right? And those servers host multiple information systems. It could host your email, it could host your accounting application. In the event that, there's a fire and all that stuff gets, burned down, you would want to have an information system contingency plan for each of those to understand how you can recover each of those systems. So it could be that you're just focused on one information system, or it could be multiple ones in the scenario of a disaster recovery, right? But it's also, it's like, I'll reiterate, it's important to have individual contingency plans for your information systems, simply because you want it easy. You want to be able to pull it out, of a folder binder, like a document, and quickly be able to see what you need to do to recover that system. So there is, and again, if we look at, all of this information is freely available. Again, if you look at special publication 800-34, it's a NIST publication. All of this information it's, when you think federal, obviously it's very wordy, and there's lots of information that can glaze over by reading it, but it's very valuable if you're willing and wanting to learn about this whole process, because it's very thorough, and it allows you to start thinking about the things that you may not be thinking about when you're starting to develop these plans. So as we tackle an information security plan, there's several steps in which you're building these plans. And one of the critical steps is evaluating really how critical this information system is, right? So if we're talking about your ERP system and you run your business out of that, you need to understand across all departments where and how they're impacted. And that's really what this business impact analysis is. That's really your first step to starting to understand the criticality of this system, and then to determine what it takes to keep it up and going and to recover from it. And so with that, I know I'm going to hand it over to Dan, because he has a fair amount of experience in building or performing BIAs, and he can kind of give you a rundown of what that process looks like.
Yeah, thanks. I really like doing a BIA, impact analysis on different information systems for my clients. And what I think of it as, the goal of the endeavor is to understand as much as I can about a specific business process or feature. And I need to understand what it affects, how it would affect your organization if that system went down. I cross-reference that with expected downtimes and all kinds of stuff. And at the end, I've gathered all this data in all these different categories. And it's staggering sometimes to see that data and to say, wow, there's this system impacts a lot more than I thought it would. It has these potential positives and these deficiencies. And the data is all laid out in front of me and the client. We can look at it and say, okay, we understand how deep the water is now. Now let's start to build plans to address anything we find. But the act of gathering all the data and lining it up and getting it presentable is incredibly valuable to our clients. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of what we do there. So when I'm engaged with a client and I go in to consult on the goal is to create a business impact analysis, we'll normally choose the most impactful service or system that the client uses normally to generate revenue, right? So we go, okay, it's your ERP or it's whatever system that we want to look at first. And we sort of try to pick the most important thing for their revenue first. And we say, okay, let's talk about this system. Now, first of all, who are the stakeholders that are involved in this system? And that can be anybody from your ownership, of course, because this system may generate revenue and that runs the business and the owner needs that. It can be down through all the way your help desk technician, because they're actively supporting this business system. It can be your clients. It can be anybody that is involved in this system at all. In a general sense, would be documented as a stakeholder, right? That's a fun exercise, because you can look at it and say, well, this information system really affects every department. It affects the ownership, and it affects stockholders, it affects the customers, and it kind of it reveals that this thing is pretty important, right? So that's sort of this first step. And then what I do is I go through a process where I understand the mission or business processes that this thing is involved in. For example, if it's your ERP, it could be involved in any number of your departments or business processes. It could be involved in where your sales team leverages this product to contact new leads and to document potential customers' information. And it could be that the business process that is affected is the same system could be used to take orders and then to fulfill orders. right? And there's all these different business units or business processes that could be affected by this one thing. So you want to document all those because you want to know the impact of is if this thing breaks, what business processes would be affected. And that reveals quite a bit too about the thing that you're doing the business impact analysis on. So then once I've gathered all of that data, I'll go in and I'll sort of create this big map. And what I want to understand is for each thing that we as consultants envision could go wrong, or have trouble with what I'm analyzing, I want to understand is what is the probability and what is the severity of anything that could happen. For example, I'll give you an example. Say we're analyzing an ERP system, and that ERP system has servers that live on the client's site and they house the software for the ERP system. So we go, okay, what would happen if one of these servers didn't boot or just didn't work? So I would document that, and then I try to assess the severity of that, and then the probability. Well, the probability that a server doesn't boot one day it's not small, but it's not certain. It's kind of right in the middle. So that's kind of the probability element of that one thing. And then what would be the severity of that? Well, it would be severe because the system won't work. So I gather all of these things, I put them together in this neat little puzzle, and then it gives me this matrix of anything that would be catastrophic and certain to happen. It shows you in a visual format that, hey, this is really, really important. Or if it's certain to happen, but the severity is just negligible, not a big deal. So I document all of that, and I kind of line all those things up. And then once I'm done with that, I take all the business processes that I outlined 2 steps before, and I document then across several areas how impactful the impact would be if that process was affected. For example, your sales customer service department uses this software, and that's how they do their job, and they talk to clients, and it's got their database and all this stuff. Well, I look at that across multiple impact categories, such as cost and customer server and legal ramifications and all these things. And I said, well, how important is that? Now, I could really get in the weeds and kind of talk about all of this, but basically I want to look at different categories of, we call them the impact categories, but I want to understand the business process and then the impact category and whether or not it's severely affected or not. For example, sales customer service, if the impact category is legal, probably not a big effect, but revenue loss, potential revenue loss, there might be a large effect. So again, it's gathering more data and it's organizing it to show you what's really important, which is really my goal of the BIA. There's another big component of the BIA where I sit with the client team, and especially department heads and department leaders and different people in the organization. And there's a component of gathering the data where I ask them, okay, how long can this system be down? What's acceptable? And oftentimes I'll hear an hour, a day, 0 time. It can't be down at all. And I gather all that. That's really important to have. And then we'll talk about things like, with your current infrastructure and procedures, how long would it take you right now if this system was down and this event happened to come back up? And really by gathering all that information from the client, it reveals what the internal expectations are of your existing systems. That's super important because oftentimes, Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump in, and what Dan's referring to is what we talk about as the maximum tolerable downtime of this system, right? So you can say, your sales team, for example, can say, I can have 0 downtime. Well,
right.
From a contingency planning standpoint, we can come back and say, okay, well, if you need 0 downtime, we can create a hot site that is replicated to the other side of the country. It's going to cost you $100,000 a year to have 0 downtime. Then you take that information and say, okay, well, I can't afford $100,000 a year. What can I do for $20,000 a year?
Right.
Well, if that's the case, then maybe you're looking at maybe 72 hours of downtime, right? So those are the kind of gives and takes and pushes and pulls that you do with regards to this impact analysis to understand not only what the expectations are, but what the budgets would allow to meet those expectations.
Right. Absolutely. I've sat with business owners and we've talked about these type of subjects of an existing system, something that's already in place. It's not a new system. It's something that they currently have. And they say, well, I can't have it down at all. And all the department heads look at me and the IT people look at me and I say, well, I understand that. That's not where you're at right now because of all of these reasons. And to get there, you know, we need to set a course and get there and sort of continue to evaluate it and move forward. But it's very revealing to the business owners or the stakeholders and the department heads and people in other non-IT departments that if there was an issue with these systems, they could be down, and they could be down for hours, days, multiple days, real life right now. And so gathering the information, having those meetings is very, very helpful, I think, for everybody involved.
It defines really at that point, once you've gone through that exercise, what the contingency plan is going to be, because it then dictates, you know, what the budgets will be, like what's your downtime maximum, what you'll need to be, what the time frame is to recover if there is an incident. Like if you after this entire process, you determine that your maximum downtime can only be 72 hours. Well, in that case, that helps IT say, okay, I need to develop a solution that would get you back up and going and operational within that window, right? And it needs to be within 48 hours so that it can be tested and put back in production. But defining what that is then allows you to then finish off building your contingency plan around that information.
That component's critical. Because what we do as consultants is we agree upon the maximum tolerable downtime with the person, normally our point of contact that we're working with. So we say, okay, we've gotten all these opinions. Let's sort of establish what we believe it should be, and then we'll document how best we think to get there, you know, as following deliverables. But it's really, really interesting to hear that from the client side and see what they expect. And then to see them, to give them the information, well, here's where you're currently at. You know, if this happened, you'd be down for 4 days, and here's why. I find that very rewarding for me, because it gives the client something they had no idea about. Yeah. And then to wrap this component up, so I talk about, I take everything that I've done. Normally it takes weeks of discovery and meeting with people and gathering all the information, putting in a giant spreadsheet. And I also add in different technical information, such as system resources and things like that, that very specifically define the technology resources that are used to support these systems. Pull that stuff together, and then we create a real fancy, nice document that basically lays out the findings. And so then as a consultant, it's my job to, oh, Patrick disappeared. It's my job to glean and to pull out the most important data that I have discovered and focus on that, and then address that with the client. I love it. I kind of feel like it's being a detective. And if I'm doing my job correctly, I've pulled out the really, really interesting things, or interesting to me. I've pulled out the really important things that the client should know in addressing, you know, if this system went down, if the system had trouble, how to get it back up. And it's a very fun part of my job, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's critical. That part is really the meat of which it takes to finish off your plans, right? So once you have that information, you would go through the other steps, which the next step would be putting in your preventative controls. This is to try to keep the system from going down at all. This could be like, you know, making sure there's fire suppression in place. You have, you know, UPSs for battery backup if there's a power out. You're basically trying to put these things in place so that the system doesn't go down at all.
Does the backups fall in that category?
It can, yeah. So backups would also be not only part of the preventative controls, because that could be the next section, which is your actual contingency strategies. This is if your system goes down, then what strategies do you have to get it back up? Backups is a great one. Backup or BDR solutions, where you're able to spin up your servers on an alternate hardware within a couple of hours. That allows you to do that. Hot sites or cold sites, where you would then, like if a site goes down or your entire infrastructure goes down, you could spin it up at a different location. Those are contingency strategies. So what happens when the system goes down, which different strategies you have to kind of bring that back up, either on the same equipment or on alternate equipment and locations. So making sure you have, like, all of the necessary hardware, warranties, all that kind of fun stuff in place, so that, like, if your RAID controller dies, you have a warranty in place that says, okay, well, I know that my SLA for that next business day to fix it. So I would assume that to bring that system back up is within 24 hours. So those sort of contingency strategies are what are developed after you understand what, again, your maximum tolerable downtime is. You're working with all these different strategies to kind of work within that window. Again, if I use that 72-hour window as our maximum tolerable downtime, I need to have all these different strategies that allow me to work within that constraint, that 72-hour window. So that's when you start building the strategies, and then you devise the actual plan, which is, when do you activate this plan, what the recovery process and steps look like. So if you have different team members that are involved on, maybe you have a network guy and a server guy and a help desk guy and your accounting department, like, who all's involved in recovering the system. And then once it's recovered, you need to make sure you have a validation, or what they call reconstitution period, where you're testing things like, okay, I got everything back up and going, but I need you guys to test it to make sure it works before I can then say, okay, it's back up and going. It's back in production. You guys can work from it at that point, right? And so those are your steps. You have your activation and notification. You have your recovery plan, and then you have your reconstitution, or that validation, that testing phase, right? And then at that point, you have a solid plan. And from that point forward, it's going to be ensuring that plan is tested and reviewed. And then you're doing exercises to kind of poke holes in this. And you do that ideally on an annual or semi-annual basis, so that you understand, what's working and what's not. And if you change a system, that you're taking that into account, so that you're maintaining that plan year over year as your environment changes, or maybe your processes change, that the plan has changed along with it. So that's kind of
they're always alive, right?
So it's always
evergreen.
Yeah. And so that's really how a plan evolves when creating one from beginning to end, is doing that impact analysis, getting all the stakeholders involved to give their input, to understand budgets and maximum downtime for the systems. And then that helps you kind of build all of the preventative controls and contingency plans around that, so that at the end of this exercise, you have a healthy plan that takes into account all of the different departments and business processes, so that it's a working plan that you can then continuously care and feed and update, so that it's always valid. So if something does go down, you whip it out in a binder or a file, and you have all the people that know what to do in that situation.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, that as we've had these discussions and we've had these webinars and we present to people and we talk to clients, the end result of all of the effort, you're going to get this thing, you're going to get these plans, and you're going to get this thing. But there's a huge component of brainstorming and putting all of that together that is easily equally as valuable, because you're sitting down with your team and you're understanding how everything works. You go, I haven't thought of that, or have we ever tested that? And, I didn't realize that was the case, that it would take 10 hours to rebuild this thing. And that information sort of discovery, so to speak, by your team and your consultants and all the department heads is super, super valuable. And so I would caution people to be wary of, well, this thing that we're going to put together, it's just, I don't think we're quite capable of putting together these plans and doing this and doing that. It's one of these things. It's like the journey. It's the journey, not the destination. Just getting to where you have some type of actionable plans at the end, super valuable. But those are going to grow and mature over time and get more detailed and get more appropriate and be modified. And that end result will get better and better and better. But it really is the journey of putting all that stuff together and brainstorming and talking with the team and gathering the information that reveals a lot to key people, that if you didn't go through the exercise, nobody would know any of that stuff. And so I like to say that, and that's probably my closing remark here.
Yeah. And the ISCP, the Information System Contingency Plan, is, from a technology standpoint, that's a great place to start because it has very binary conclusions to it, right? Like it's addressing a very specific system. It's very specific, all the different departments that are involved with it. But once you've sort of developed 1, 2, 3, 4 of these information system contingency plans, then you're starting to build kind of a mature policy, right? And then you can start looking at these other contingency plans that we discussed earlier, to make sure that those are in place for the entire organization. So at some point, and this could be months, if not years, right, on how long it takes to build these. But at some point, once you start creating these across all of the different areas of your organization, then you have a mature and solid contingency plan across all areas of your organization, not just information systems.
Yeah, what I've seen lately is, I used to kind of say that, the bigger and more mature your organization was, the more likely they're going to put these things in place and have these plans and be able to dedicate resources to do this. And that kind of makes sense. Well, over the years, I've kind of seen that even really small, brand new organizations can do this and be really, really effective. So as I'm meeting with clients that are fairly small for us, which is 15, 20, 30 people, I am certain that firms that size can go through this effort and develop these items at the end and be very, very successful. So don't think, well, I'm a smaller company, maybe it's not important to me. And, the IT guy just works right here and he lives down the street and I know how to handle all this stuff. Well, I would say that while that's great, putting this information together is certainly something you could do. And I would suggest you do it regardless of the size or the age of your organization.
Yeah, that's perfectly it. Yeah. So with that, I think we're done for this webinar here.
I'm glad that Buddy popped in, and he was crying the whole time. He had brought me his toy and he set it right by me and he's like, "Throw the toy, man." And so Buddy was chirping and having my cat. And so y'all enjoy that?
Back there sleeping. I lucked out on this one because she's usually in my lap.
Yeah. So. Right on.
But I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining us. I hope you learned a little bit. So we say thank you and goodbye and see you next time.
Adios.
Bye-bye.